I will invite you to one. Students from Doctor in Research Management, master students, and undergraduate students, lecturers, alumni, staff, and other faculty members, and other Venusians present here on site and virtually via Zoom. Good afternoon once again to you. Welcome to the international webinar with the University of Glasgow, United Kingdom. I'm Alex from Venus International Office, your host, and I'm honored to be here today sharing this wonderful session with you. Firstly, I am pleased to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Ramona Blains. She is senior lecturer from Master of Global Business and MBA, MSc Euro Asian Program, Director, Management from University of Glasgow, United Kingdom. And I also would like to welcome Professor Dr. Insinyur Muhammad Hamsal, MSc, MQM, MBA, our Head of Corporate Strategy and Agility of Doctor in Research Management, Venus University, who would be our moderator for today's session. Thank you, Prof. Okay. Venusians, on this opportunity, we are honored to host a seminar by Dr. Ramona Blains. She will talk about public sector reform for sustainable development, bridging policy and practice. The issue of public sector reform was convened to address the pressing need for transforming public sector institutions in line with Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs. As nations around the world, especially Indonesia right now also, very recently, face complex challenges such as climate change, poverty, inequality, and governance issues, this seminar sought to explore how public sector reforms can be strategically aligned to achieve these global objectives. Here, our speaker will talk more about it and how can we adapt and learn to build better public governance. Okay, Venusians, before we move into the discussion and presentation, allow me to inform all attendees to remain until the end of the session to complete an exit ticket to record the attendance, and also from the Zoom participants, there will be no entry ticket for Zoom participants. And I also encourage you to take full advantage of this unique learning experience by actively participating in the Q&A session. Okay, now without further ado, allow me to hand over the session. I would like to invite Dr. Ramona Blains and Professor Dr. Insinyur Muhammad Hamsal to come to the stage. Please give applause. Okay. I will give to Professor Dr. Insinyur Muhammad Hamsal to read the discussion and presentation. The time is yours, Prof. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Face to face and also through the online Zoom. Good afternoon again. Today we have honored to have Dr. Ramona and team from University of Glasgow, UK. I think you are familiar with the institution, What we know about Glasgow is your football team, soccer, Glasgow Rangers. Is it correct? Yeah. What I know, at least what I know. Yeah. And many panoramic view, in the country. Okay. I will read the short biodata from Dr. Ramona. Dr. Ramona Blains, senior lecturer from University of Glasgow, UK. She has more than 20 years of experience working in senior position in financial service, management consultancy organization, and also she has worked in Asia and Europe and with clients and colleagues in Asia, Europe, Latin America, North America, and in the Middle East. I think this is a global, global scope and also global experience, I think. Dr. Ramona has MBA specializing in Islamic banking and finance. Her PhD research explored the concept of public value and public sector reform. Yeah, that's suitable for these topics. Yeah, through the lens of intelligent transportation systems. Her areas of expertise: business ethics, financial services, and technology, including IT. I think, yeah, digitalization, big value sector reform. The main topic for this afternoon, and reverse innovation. Yeah. Okay, the event will be consist of some sequences. Yeah. After this, Dr. Ramona will share his knowledge, his experience, and insight about the public sector reform, especially talking about the trending topics, not only in Indonesia, but also around the world, globally, about sustainable development, many issues. And I think Dr. Ramona will give us more, not only description or explanation, maybe her experience, yeah, and her hands-on experience, yeah, about this topic. After Dr. Ramona explain and share his insight and knowledge, will be followed by Q&A sessions. Yeah, I will give the opportunity to Bapak Ibu in this room and also through online Zoom. Yeah, and then will be followed by session of appreciation event. Yeah, and then closing by moderator, and we will take picture together before we dismiss the event. Okay, without further ado, I will give the opportunity to Dr. Ramona to give your question. Please give big applause to her. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ramona. Time's yours.
Terima kasih, Pak. Selamat petang, tengah hari, sore, siang. Okay, siang. Let me just go through all my Indonesian. Maybe I get the right word. So, as Bapak has mentioned, my name is Ramona Blanes. I am Malaysian who has lived in the UK for too long, maybe Scotland for too long, according to my parents. But I am still Malaysian. 3/4 of my family are in Indonesia, half of them in Java, half in Kalimantan. But I don't speak Javanese or Bugis. Unfortunately, I only speak Malay badly. Indonesian, even worse. So, because of that, I will do this sharing of knowledge in English. Now, if you can't understand me, because sometimes I tend to speak too fast, or sometimes the Scottish thing came about, and about, see, do stop me, and I will try and explain. So now I have with me my team members. We have Bakit and Ablai. I literally drag them with me everywhere I go. And we're going to share this session because this, to be honest, this is not the first time we do this topic, obviously. So we will be tagging each other on this. So I will start with talking about public sector reform. Bakit will then talk about sustainable development, sustainability, and the consequences of not making the right decision. And then Ablai will give a recommendation on how this can be minimized. So our style is always very informal. So I don't like formality. I used to be an investment banker a long time ago, based in London, but for an American bank. Hence why everywhere, everywhere, every Monday I fly out to another city, another country, and come back on Thursday evening. Sometimes I have no clue where I go. I go to the wrong airport, and the ladies at the check-in counter actually says, call me, Ramona, not this airport, the other airport. Yeah, they went to the other airport. They even know my face by then. So this, what we're going to present to you are based on our research, our own research, as well as our personal knowledge. When I say personal knowledge, with academics, if you don't have enough data to empirically prove something, then you don't really want to say that this is the right thing. So we'll say some are our own opinions, and some have been backed with empirical data. So please stop me on any one of my team if you have any question. Don't be shy, okay? Because there's no right or wrong way, as you know, with social sciences, no right or wrong way. So let's even if you're on Zoom, please just let us know. I'm trying to figure out how. No, this thing doesn't work. Somehow it doesn't work though.
Yes,
Okay, now it works.
it's moving.
So the agenda, as I've just mentioned, we'll talk about public sector reform, and I will introduce, hopefully, it's a new concept to you, called public value. Have you heard of the public value concept? Have you heard of the public interest concept? I'm sure you have heard of it, public interest concept. So now I'm going to introduce to you the public value concept. And then Bakit's going to talk about sustainable development, not too much because everybody knows SDGs, right? We don't have to go through SDG, all the 17 SDGs. We know what SDGs are. Do you know when all these countries, Indonesia included, we have signed the agreement saying we're going to meet the SDG target. Do you know when we're supposed to be meeting that target? Can you remember? 2030, yes, exactly. When is 2030? In 6 years' time, right? Can we meet it? Not sure. I am 100% sure that we cannot meet it. I'm 100% sure we cannot meet that. But does it mean that we have to stop trying? No, we still need to continue, even though we know for a fact we're not going to meet the target, but we need to go and meet. So, Bakit's going to talk about sustainable development or sustainability. Not touching the SDGs because you're already expert in that. And then after that, he's going to also talk about unintended consequences of things if we don't make the right decisions, and how do we make the right decisions considering unintended consequences. And then Apply is going to give us some examples and some suggestions that bridges policy and practices on how to make things more sustainable. Hopefully that's all right with you. So I don't know how many of you are in the public sector management research. Okay, I'll just briefly tell you now. The way we govern a country, the way the ministries govern their sectors, and the way local government governs, I think the style of governance are the same. No? Yes? No? Yes? No? No. Why?
Thank you, Dr. Ramana. My name is Al Badari. Actually, one of my research in local government in tourism sector. So what I found is actually they have the capability in digital and the capability in other perspective, and they are quite different. I mean the local government compared to the minister. Yes, but the program actually is they have the same program. It's the difference. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else disagree with what has been said just now? You guys alright? Faham tak? Bisa faham? Bisa? Bisa, okay. Now, from my research as well, we find that the way governance at these three different levels can sometimes be different. Yeah, sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different. Now, what influenced them? How do you know they're different? Now, what I have put on there, this is actually my own from my own research. What we have put in there is 4 types of governance in every country. So normally we say in every country, a country starts out with public administration. So what are the characteristics of public administration? If I can make it simple, public administration means that somebody tell you this is what you need to do. You just administer it. You just do what you have been told to do. So that is the simplest way I can describe public administration. Now, normally this when we first get our Merdeka, right? Independence. Happy Independence Day, by the way. When we arrived, it was actually your Independence Day, and so we have nothing to do except we see people walking the streets on the parade, and I see people with hanging people and people with ball and chain. And I call my friends and family and say, "This is not a very good way to be watched." Because you might just be dragged down the road. But anyway, so independence. So normally we say that once you get your independence, then you are going to be taking in orders and then just administrating them. There's nothing wrong with it. There is nothing wrong with it, because you need to make sure that you have stabilized your country first before you try anything, innovative or anything drastic. You want to stabilize your country first. So you just take orders. However, theoretically, again, I said theoretically because we have just found out from research that doesn't necessarily mean that we move completely away from this. Once you have stabilized the country, then you will then want to manage that country. So now you're starting to think, how do I make things better for the country? So initially you're an administrative man. Now you are now trying to think. So you have your own choices, your own rationality, and you're influenced by your own ideology, so that you can mold this country to be what you want it to be. Okay, so that's the simplest way for me to explain public management. So you manage it. Now that you know how your country is looking like, what your identity is as Indonesia, then you're going to say, like, now we need to make money. Because no country can survive without actually having money, right? A country is like an organization and like a business. Without money, you cannot move forward, right? So your sustainable development will not be sustainable. So how do we make money? Now, we come from the Adam Smith Business School. Adam Smith is the father of modern economics. And Adam Smith says, in order to make money, one of the things you do is to have competitive advantage. Right? So all these things, all these theories, you start thinking about it, you start learning. So people in public sector don't just hire people who learn public policy, but they're now hiring people with economics background, with accounting background, other types of people, because these theories are now helping you to make your policy choices, helping you to make your decision, and you are starting to try and integrate FDI, for example, into your country so that you can make money. So this type of governance is now known as new public management. So you can see the way it should be moving. Now the last one, new public service. Now new public management theoretically is not new. It starts from Thatcher times, Margaret Thatcher. Most of you are very young, too young to remember who she is. But we know, right? Okay. So Margaret Thatcher was a former prime minister of the United Kingdom. Yeah. We don't want to talk about her. But it started with Margaret Thatcher, new public management. Yeah. Now, so new public management has started a long time ago. That's in the 70s, Margaret Thatcher. But what we see is new public service, this latest way of governance. From my research, only 3 countries have achieved that in totality. And the 2 countries are Sweden and the Netherlands. Now, upon looking at it, I think for the Netherlands at least, I think it's more due to their historical and cultural ways of thinking. We can discuss this if we have time later on, but the reason why I'm saying this is because we move from looking at things from top down, and then we started thinking, we started infusing in economic theories, and now with new public management, we're actually trying to get people to be involved in our decision making. Now, so my argument is that public sector reform is a continuum. So we need to work from one to the next one. Some ministries, some local government are faster in getting there. Some of them lags behind. Some of them go to the front, and then something happened. Maybe minister took care, or the head of the government took care, or anybody had took care. Then they go back a little bit. So that's why we see that it's different at the 3 levels, even within the an organization. Sometimes they have different style of governance. Yeah? Now, so what makes them go from one to another? I want to introduce to you the concept of public value. Now, public value, again, this is not a new concept. The concept was first introduced by Mike Moore, who is a professor in public policy at Harvard, and in 1995. However, as we all who have researched finds out that a lot of the times when you are doing your research in developed countries, what you try to implement or try to understand in developed countries, when you try and put it in developing countries, does not work. Well, it's significantly different. So the same thing happens here. I did comparative studies. Malaysia, UK, US, Netherlands. That's my initial study. And I find that, yes, the idea is there. However, the way it is implemented is different in developing countries compared to developed. Now, it's okay. We still want to understand the concept. So what does the concept mean? Now, the definition, as you all know, there's so many definitions of everything in academia. Now, we're going to use my definition because this is my talk. So I'm using my definition. Who cares about other people, right? So my definition of public value is the perception of shared values, consequential from direct and indirect dialogues with the public, which addresses the needs of the present and future generations. Now, there are three things here. One, public value is a perception of shared values. Okay, so its perception could not be real. It may not be real, yeah, but it's a perception. But the perception is shared. So it's not my perception, it's not your perception, it's not your perception, it's a shared perception. Everybody in here have the same perception. Two, that this perception, you as the public manager, so we're looking at it from public sector, okay? So you as the public manager get this perception after having a dialogue with the public. Who are the public? The public are the people, the community that you are trying to serve. Or if you're trying to come up with this policy or program, those are the people who are supposed to be your users and other stakeholders. Those are the public. So you need to have a dialogue, direct or indirect. Now, I mean dialogue. What is the definition of dialogue? Can somebody give me a definition of dialogue? What's a dialogue? Yeah?
Hi, my name is Vito. Based on my knowledge, dialogue should be conversation, perhaps sharing thoughts between one and another. That is. Thank you.
Answered that. Now, that's exactly it. A dialogue should be a conversation with one another. Now, have you guys ever been to a consultation process by any public sector manager? They want to do something, they call for public consultation. Ada kan? Ada, like, you might not be involved in it, but they do call. I noticed in Indonesia, they do call for public consultation. No, it's not just Indonesia. Malaysia as well, same thing. But Scotland as well. Now, Scotland, we call them developing nation as well. They might be within the UK, but and UK is a developed nation, Scotland is a developing nation. We do call for public consultation. However, it's one way. It's a monologue. It's not a dialogue. So this morning we had similar discussion with Jabatan Taxation, the Taxation Department. See, you're performing your tax. They basically agree, yeah, that most of the time it's a one way. So a monologue. You have consultation, but it's monologue. Now, process is there, but the way implementation of the process is not correct. I'm gonna put my head in it and say not correct. Because if it's a monologue, it's definitely not a consultation. It's just you telling people what's happening, not consultation. So, right? So public value, you need that dialogue. So if you have consultation, you must make sure that there's a dialogue. I said direct and indirect because sometimes it's not you, it's not your department that do the consultation. It's probably the I don't know, in Indonesia, governor or the EXCO member who has had the consultation with the people outside election time. Okay? During election time, I don't call that consultation. Okay, that's a different thing. So if they talk to the people under their naungan, right? I think that's the right word. So it could be the feedback that they get, they pass to you. It's still a dialogue. That's fine. So those are indirect because you don't do it yourself. But all this, when you have that consultation, what you will hear from them is their wants most of the time. What they want. From the wants, you need to extract the needs. Because you will start hearing one, you ask why, then you find out from the why, the needs. And then from that, you extract the values that are shared amongst them. So that's when you get public value. And that public value must meet needs for the present generation currently, as well as future generation. So when we are trying to do or implement public value concept, or change the mindset into a public value mindset, we automatically are trying to be making decisions that involve sustainable development. Because you're not just thinking about now, you're also thinking about future generations. Huh? So it's an automatic thing once you've done that. Yeah? Now, of course, the problem is starting to change that mindset. Yeah? So I've put down an asterisk. Somehow or other, the asterisk always goes to become a dot. But values will depend on the communities that you're talking to. Because some community might value more economic stuff. Some might value social, some might value moral. But it needs to be an amalgamation of whatever is valued by the community you're talking to, by the stakeholders that are going to be directly and indirectly impacted by the policies and programs that you're making. So there's no clear-cut way of what is the value that we need to look into. Okay, sorry. We need to go back. The first sustainability. Okay. Sorry, as in front. Go through. Okay, next one. Okay. So that concept of public value is quite clear. We will discuss it again later at the end when I summarize everything and how we can implement it. But right now I'm going to pass it to Bakit, and then he's going to talk to you about sustainability and unintended consequences.
Thank you very much. Well, so my name is Bakit, and then I'm going to be talking today about sustainability. And you can also remember me as a guy who's about unintended consequences. Okay. So sustainability, just remember I mentioned that we're all here about sustainability all the time. Just to make sure we're all on the same page. Anyone's here to tell us what sustainability is. Thank you very much. So would you please elaborating on it? The bottom line, people, project, and planet. Okay, so
Profit, people, planet, in the main, so the main, we call this about economic, social, and environment. Planet. Yeah, the main concept of sustainability is about how to ensure that the existing situation, everything, can be maintained or can be continue in the long time.
Thank you very much, Bert. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, exactly. So it's about being able to address the current challenges without compromising the future, the needs of the future generation, right? In a nutshell, Thank you very much for sharing with us. Right, so now sustainability, nowadays we can see the tendency where some companies, organizations, they focus more on the profit rather than the other aspects that, sorry, may I ask your name, please? Akhtar. Okay, so Akhtar just mentioned about planet and as well as the society. So they might focus, well, there's a tendency to focus more about the profit. So, which is more about output rather than outcome. The difference between outcome and output is the one is in the short, immediate result, while the other is long-term effect of certain decisions. So, which brings me to the old phenomena, but new term, such as unintended consequences. So the second page, please. This one, right? Go back one page, please. So unintended consequences. Unintended consequences, in a nutshell, it is about the outcome of our decisions, which wasn't our original plan or intention. We make decisions. In decision-making process, choose among available alternatives. We have several options. And when we choose a particular option, we expect a certain outcome from that thing. However, the problem is sometimes our choice might result in something which we didn't anticipated, but wasn't our intention. So, unintended consequences are outcomes of purposive action which are not part of the original intention. Maybe one of the examples is the Cobra effect. You might have heard of this example during British rule in India. Lots of population in India and then troops, they suffered from poison snakes. In order to solve this problem, the British government introduced a bounty program. But for every dead snake, they gave some rewards. Seemingly, while initially the policy worked well, however, it led also to unintended consequences. Why? Because some entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs in India, in order to make money from this, they started home breeding snakes. And then when the Indian or the UK government got to know about it, they canceled the program. Now the entrepreneurs, with millions of now worthless snakes, what do they do? Set them free. As a result, it killed even more people than it did in the very beginning. So unintended consequences. And then this morning, we've been also reminded of 3-in-1 policy, the transportation policy in Indonesia. Maybe some of you know about it, where in order to reduce the traffic congestion in Jakarta in Indonesia, so the government in early 19th introduced this 3-in-1 policy. However, due to some jockeys, and then some safety issues, which also led to unintended consequences. But this wasn't the part of Indonesian government. Our initial aim was to reduce the congestion. However, resulted in something that wasn't part of the intention, which, also had consequences in terms of losing a lot of money, safety issues, etc. So, therefore, we are introducing this topic, unintended consequences. We make decisions every time because of the uncertainty. Uncertainty has always been there. And then this is the primary barrier for decision making. If you have to choose between this remote and like this, there wouldn't be any decision making for you. You would just choose, let's say if I ask for a mic, you just ask for the mic. However, this is uncertain. Don't know what it is. And then this is triggers our decision making. That's why there were, well, maybe we understood that this university is more engineering university, and then you might be aware of the Newton's, the arrow of time. So basically saying we can predict the future with absolute certainty, and then et cetera, et cetera. However, the science proves that no matter how well you study the, let's say the person does, but you can never predict with absolute certainty what numbers you're going to get next time you toss it. So there is always uncertainty. And then this uncertainty, powerful decision making. And those decisions, because of the uncertainty and then bounded rationality due to the inherent, the limitations of human language, might lead to unintended consequences. What I'm saying is, in a simple notion, is when we make decisions, we don't all the information, but rather our knowledge and is based on what we know and then our experience. Based on that, we make decisions. And also our decisions might be influenced by our emotions, beliefs, expectations, all these cognitive biases. Sometimes because something worked in the past, we think it's still going to work in the future. So all these human intricate things that affect our decision making. However, and when it results in unintended consequences, we say, how come it resulted in this one? So, therefore, next page, please. Okay, good. Therefore, here we have to share some of the insights to understand the unintended, the drivers for unintended consequences. The first of all it is about cognitive biases, cognitive bias. So, we make decisions in order to substitute less satisfactory situation into a more satisfactory one. This is the trigger for any decision, the action. And in doing so, we believe that our action, our decision is going to result in the consequences which we expect. For example, we are here at this beautiful university because the education we get from this university, we believe that will be useful for us in the long term. Right? So such beliefs, expectations, perceptions, images, they are not something tangible, but rather they are something intellectual thing, something deep inside. No one has touched them. And then what scholars say is they are inherent in our decision making. So every time we make decisions, we need to be aware of such things, including the biases such as confirmation bias. Sometimes we really want something, and in order to justify what we want that thing, we always seek evidence that supports that choice, right? Or anchoring or confirmation bias, where let's say something worked in the past, as I have just mentioned, and then we think, well, that's going to work in our case as well, or maybe something in other country worked very well, and we think, okay, it's going to work here as well. However, future is always uncertain, so we got to remember this. Another one is dramatic decision making that might lead to unintended consequences. Why? Because sometimes when we see when we are about to make decisions, we are so much influenced by the end outcome, the spectacular, visible outcome by which we undermine all these small incremental steps in between. So, for example, let's say in getting accepted to the university, we think, oh, to bring the final points. However, we might ignore the small daily steps that takes place every day. So, and then such dramatic, the visuals at the very end can be also the trigger point and consequences. Immediate interest, short-term benefits, short-term output over long-term. So another one is absence of comprehensive analysis. It has been proven that due to the knowledge limitations, there is a factor such as human error. We might make mistakes in our analysis, evaluation, etc., so on. So it is always important to be aware of such things, and as well as top-down approach. Whenever we make a decision, we need to understand we are part of one system. We are not living in isolation, but rather our. So what I would like to bring your attention is, if we think of a cake, the birthday cake, when we take one piece out of it, let's say that's a decision. However, we need to understand that when we take that choice, when we make one choice, we are leaving that cake without one piece. What I mean, Anna, in other words, is when we make decisions in real life, when we choose something, that means we are leaving others aside, which might eventually hunt us back. So, decision making, in order to, again, minimize the consequences, such it's always important to involve all the stakeholders possible, right? So I do understand we've got time. So therefore, any questions later, we're more than happy to address. Just wanted to say one point is there are so many key points, but one thing is we also need to understand that, especially the public, we are talking about public policy as well. Sometimes there are more people who are from marginalized community that are significantly affected by our decisions and are not in the position to hold decision makers responsible. So therefore, understanding on the consequences is very important. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thank you very much, Paket, for such interesting points. Can you give me, yeah, please? No, this one, yeah. Now I wanted to discuss with you about some tools of, yes? Okay, no problem. All right, of course, we can. Yeah. It is unintended consequences. Yeah. So is it okay now? Okay, good. So what I wanted to try to discuss with you about, like some of the tools, concept, yes, that impact favorably to the sustainable development. So this concept is called the reverse innovation. Did you heard about this concept, reverse innovations? Do you know something about reverse innovation? Yes. Any thoughts? Like there is not like as we stressed it at the beginning, there is not like a correct or yes, one more. Sorry.
For me, this is the first time I heard about the.
All right. Any thoughts maybe about what do you think about what is it?
I have no idea.
Okay. All right. Any ideas? All right. Good. Any other thoughts? All right. Let's move forward. And reverse innovations, actually, it's a concept which are related with when the innovation are developing in developing countries and then it's allocated to the more developed countries. Traditionally, innovations are developing in developed countries. One of the bright examples is Silicon Valley, where there is a different like kind of favorable conditions like access to human capital, access to financial capital, digital and financial infrastructure, favorable regulatory framework, as a macroeconomic indicators. So even though like developed countries have such opportunities, it doesn't mean that innovations only developing in developing countries. As we will see later on, we will some successful examples of reverse innovations. You will see that developing countries quite successful in this case. So here you can see the key characteristics of reverse innovations. The first one is related with the origin from the unique needs and constraints of developing countries. It also includes affordability designed to be low cost and accessible to the price customers. The third one, in most of the cases, relate that reverse innovations are very adaptable to more developed countries, but it's not always happens, as we will discuss later on. There is also reverse innovations are prioritize use, easy use and adaptability of various contexts. And the last key characteristic is a disruptive potential. When introducing developed markets, reverse innovations actually often change the existing industries that offer innovative alternatives. Here you can see the benefits and challenges of reverse innovations. The benefits of reverse innovation is it provides the opportunity to expand the market, which impact to the economic growth and improves the living standards of the people. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's also like a quite cheaper than general innovations, and it's created for people with related with a cost-sensitive customers. So, the next benefit is the innovation stimulus, which are created by reverse innovations. So it's like a disrupt conventional thinking and to more new approaches of thinking, of problem solving. And finally, it's social impact. Of course, it's like impact not only directly to the one aspects of the community, but other aspects as well, such as education, healthcare system, and so on. The main challenges of the reverse innovations, it's market adaptation, as I mentioned earlier. Even like reverse innovation are quite often adaptable to more developed countries, but sometimes it's not possible because developed and developing countries might have cultural differences, infrastructural limitations, and so on. There is also quite difficult to reverse innovation to scaling up because it sometimes requires significant financial resources. Then another challenge is cultural differences because in developed countries and developing countries, the public our values might be different. For example, if we are from Kazakhstan and our values might be different from your values, or people who are living in the UK, they have the different values. So some innovation can be applicable due to the cultural differences or customers' preferences. And the last one is the perception of the quality, that some of the innovations, it's human behavior that some people thinking like, if it is cheaper, the cost of the services or products are cheap, it sometimes means like the quality also, but it's actually it is not. So here I wanted to discuss with you about some successful examples of reverse innovations that bridge the practice and policies. Actually, why it's successful? Because it was achieved through the active collaboration between the different stakeholders of the community and public incentives and collaboration with the local and external communities. So reverse innovations we can see like from the 5 aspects of the public industry. It's healthcare, education, governance, and public administration, sustainability and infrastructure, and financial inclusion. Let's consider like the first one, healthcare. Healthcare. So one of the successful reverse innovation was related with community health working programs, which was actually developed initially in Ethiopia and India. Then it was successfully adopted in US, in some US states. These programs allowed to in most of the cases for non-professional people to provide the basic healthcare services. This program was successful, especially for communities who are living in rural and remote areas. Next one, education, let's say, low-cost educational models. It's about providing with low technological requirements, providing the opportunity of study for large number of students. So one of the bright example of this model is, did you heard about the Coursera? Coursera. It's the platform which provides different kind of educational programs around the world for more than 100, not 100, even like 1,000 programs, which allow to the students and professionals to receive some different kind of knowledge expertise. Because my expertise related with the fintech, I wanted to in more detail discuss maybe about the financial inclusions. So around maybe 2007, 2008, there arise so many alternative financial providers, which we call the fintech startups. So one of the bright example of fintech startups in developing countries, it was M-Pesa, which was really successful, not only in the Kenya, but it was expanded to other sub-Saharan countries and was impact to the improving financial inclusivity for these countries. But the good things of this company is that they even they try to adopt to more developed countries. Even it was not successful, but the idea was impact to other companies like Revolut, Monzo Bank, because many customers and companies realize that financial service might be provided not only by banks, but also by fintech startups itself. So here I just due to the time limitation, I just wanted to stress some recommendation for fostering the reverse innovations. It's obviously it's policy alignment with the practical needs. As I said earlier, it's very good if different kind of stakeholders interact with to achieve the reverse innovation. Then another recommendation, it will be good to reduce the barriers to the companies in order to enter to the markets. The next recommendation, it is the incentives for adoptions. It might be specific government programs, or maybe some tax incentives. So of course, it's public awareness and education. It's very important in order to if we want that innovation are developing and it will be covered and adopted in other countries, it's necessary improve the awareness and education of many people. And finally, it's facilitate knowledge sharing and collaboration. Of course, as much people collaborate with each other. For example, my expertise, as I said, in fintech ecosystem, and I found in my research that collaboration is the key indicators of the any industry. So now I wanted to give some final points to my colleague, to Dr. Benes. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Bucket and Ablai have told you about the importance. Well, Bucket talk about when we make decisions, when we're trying to consider a future, we need to make sure that we also think about, are aware of potential unintended consequences. Now, from our research, we find that a lot of policy making, a lot of decisions on policies in public sectors do not really consider the long term. They don't really consider other scenarios and other stakeholders involved. They just look at the direct users. Now, because of that, we see a lot of unintended consequences. There are, of course, positive unintended consequences, which we are happy to get. However, we're more concerned of the negative part of unintended consequences, whereby we could have probably minimized it if we had done something about it at the start. Yeah, we found out earlier because we had a discussion again at the ministry earlier that there could have been ways for them to minimize some of the policies that they have taken. Yeah, by taking into consideration the public value concept, for example. So, what I see in Indonesia is this. Okay? What we want to be eventually, maybe after I'm dead and all of you are dead, we'll achieve this. Yeah. It doesn't matter if we don't really achieve it, but let's aim for it. So, but what we do see is this part. Now, what this is the service, I call it the service provision process, whereby right now, when we're trying to make decision for any policies, especially for policies involved in sustainable development, we are very much reliant on the authorizing environment. We take inputs. From this authorizing environment, and authorizing environment, I do not just mean wahyu from above. Okay? Authorizing environment can be people who have the right or responsibility or interest to audit you. So now, we only consider the official audits, right? The official people who we have, or organization we have direct line to. But in today's world, as you know, there are a lot of social media. Anything we do can easily be leaked out in social media. Any decision we make can easily be leaked out in social media. Now, in the private sector, if we make a decision and leaked out social media, the impact can be bad, yes, but it's the private sector. It's your own company. You technically, if you own the company, you have the right to do whatever you want with the company, right? Now, but if you're in the public sector, technically, you're working for the public. So everything you do must be for public. Now, we need to be theoretically transparent on why we make certain decisions. I say theoretically because I know in practice we can't be always transparent. But in the UK, we have this thing called freedom of information. You know, before I was the head of subject for management for the business school, I used to fly business class everywhere. Yeah, anything. When I was an investment banker, it's either business class or nothing. First class, that's all right. Economy, I'm not going on to that plane. Bring me another plane. Now I'm head of subject at the Adam Smith Business School for management. Now I fly economy. You think the higher you go, right? The more responsibility you have, the better it is, right? I could fly first class now. No. Because I have responsibility, now I'm flying economy. Because there's this thing called freedom of information. Anybody can write and say, I want to see what Ramona's expenses are like. And they have to show it. And our vice chancellor, vice principal, senior vice principal, all of them, every year somebody would ask for all their expenses. So if they buy coffee and expense it out, there will be an outrage. So all the vice chancellors, all the vice principals at University of Glasgow, all fly economy. Anywhere. Before I was head of subject, I was flying business, they were flying economy. So I just say, okay, see you later, I'm going to the lounge. And they have to sit down. So that's transparency. Now, I know in Malaysia, in Indonesia, we're not going to get there yet. Thank God for that. Yeah, very difficult. It makes my life really difficult. Now I have like clicks everywhere when you fly. But what we do want is we do want to co-create our policies, our programs with the public. Because when we co-create it with them, this concept of co-creation was created by marketing people. But we now have, well, at least I have taken it onto the public sector world, where you co-create, and then when you know what they want, when they know what that you're trying to do, what they want, the chances of success will be much higher. Don't you think that? Just common sense. If you guys all decide with me what we're gonna do after this, the chances of all of you guys following me to do that would be much higher than me just telling you this is what we're gonna do, isn't it? Yeah. So I see in Indonesia, when you try to do consultation, you're trying to co-create. Trying is the operative word, but it's good. But you don't do a lot of co-production or co-implementation as yet, except PPP. Yeah, public-private partnership, except for that. But a lot of the times, you do sole implementation. Is it okay to do sole implementation? Yes, of course, it's okay to do sole implementation. But remember, you have limited resources. Yeah, the public sector have limited resources. If you can share it with other sector, not just private sector, but also the third sector, the higher education, the voluntary, the charity, even the communities of people to implement things, and they have implemented things like in a lot of countries where they do garbage collection together with other people. Yeah, if you can do co-production, then you are able to have more programs and more programs to be sustainable, to make your development more sustainable. Yeah. So what we also see is that from here, we normally concentrate on the users. Users are people who are directly impacted. We forget about the other stakeholders. Now let's talk about something extremely sensitive for Malaysia and Indonesia. The palm oil industry. Extremely sensitive, yeah? No, not sensitive anymore? I think it's very sensitive. I have uncles who have estates as well. Do you think I can get out of Indonesia if I talk about this? Yeah, still okay. The output of the palm oil industry when you start palm oil policy. What's the current policy in Indonesia about palm oil industry? Continue with developing it or stopping? Huh? The policy, the current policy. Expansion kan? Still expansion kan? Sekarang ni still expansion ya? Your ni, because I think it's the same with Malaysia as well. It's still expansion. So what's the output? Because now I want you to differentiate between output and outcome. What's the output of that policy? Apa output dia? More income for the country, right? Higher GDP. Correct? Correct? Agree? Correct? Okay. That's the output of it. What's the outcome? Deforestation is again an output because it's immediate. That's what's happening now. Outcome is something that happens in the long term. So what will happen in the long term to Indonesia? That's why Jakarta's going down. Betul? Yeah. So we need, when we do that, this is the outcome relates to unintended consequences. This, we don't intend that to happen. We don't want Jakarta to sink, right? But you right? And then you've cut down too many trees. So that's the outcome. That's the unintended consequences. So when for sustainable development, we encourage you to change your mindset into a more public value mindset in order for you to try and minimize your unintended consequences. Don't just think of the output, think of the outcome. Eventually, we want you to do this. Eventually. But, you know, that's okay if you don't get this. Just if we can get the arrows here to be also here, and that you don't just think about users, but also other stakeholders, I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be okay. Yeah? Yes, exactly. Because that's when you can get sustainable development. Without minimizing that, there's no sustainable development. Yeah, that's one of the things to try and push it so that it becomes biofuel, right? But how are you going to balance with biofuel and deforestation? If you're still going to expand, you're going to lose the biodiversity. Right? Which one is more important for your future outcome? So that's where public sector managers need to before making that decision. Yeah. Exactly. That's why I said minimize the unintended consequences. Now, sometimes the unintended consequences might be positive. That one we go like, oh, actually, I thought about it myself. Yeah. Take credit lah. Yeah. Even though you didn't think about it. But if it's negative, we want to try and minimize it. There's no way of avoiding. No way. I mean, I'm a realist. I worked in an investment bank. I'm a realist. People say you avoid the risk. I said, like, what avoid risk? Minimize risk, yes. No elimination of risk at all. Yeah. Only two things certain: death and taxes. Even taxes you can try and avoid. Oh, not avoid, sorry. Not avoid tax. Be creative with the tax. Yes. Yeah. So that's, if I can just summarize that as that, and if there's any question, I'm going to pass it to Bapak for the Q&A. But if there's any question, please do ask us. Thank you very much.
Yes. I think Ibu want to raise question, Ibu. Yeah. Just mention your name first, Bu, and from institution. Yes, thank you, Bu.
Okay. Hi, Miss Ramona. My name is Ari. I'm a student in management, BRM. Your presentation is related with my research actually in public healthcare sector. I'm already have research last year regarding clinic healthcare clinic in Indonesia actually. In my demographic research result is in Indonesia actually we have tidak merata tuh apa ya?
You can speak in Indonesian as well.
Listen, I understand Indonesian, okay? Might not be able to speak it fluently, but I understand it.
Jadi di Indonesia sendiri hasil penelitian saya melihat bahwa penyebaran klinik itu sendiri tidak merata. Dominannya terpusat di Jawa dan hasilnya di luar Jawa itu tidak merata. Artinya memang ada, tapi memang yang menyebarnya jauh-jauh gitu kayak modalnya. Nah, yang terkoneksi dengan yang di pusat di Jawa adalah klinik-klinik yang memang besar. Hubungan dengan presentasi dari profesor tadi, yang untuk bisa mengkoneksikan antara klinik yang di luar Jawa dengan di Jawa itu adalah kalau mereka mempunyai healthcare community sendiri. Jadi dalam penelitian saya itu sebutnya healthcare service ecosystem. Nah, untuk masuk ke dalam ekosistem ini, kalau dia adalah klinik-klinik yang memang memiliki banyak anak cabang, jelas mereka terkoneksi karena berada dalam satu ekosistem yang sama gitu. Tetapi permasalahannya, klinik yang tidak memiliki channel untuk masuk ke dalam healthcare community ini bermasalah. Mereka tidak bisa untuk masuk ke dalam proses untuk sustainability itu, makanya banyak klinik yang tumbang di Indonesia. Karena sebenarnya ketika memang masuk ke health community itu positifnya mereka bisa saling support ekosistem tadi. Tetapi untuk menjamah yang di Jawa ini ke luar Jawa itu betul-betul harus butuh jaringan dan butuh mereka masuk. Masalahnya pemerintah Indonesia belum sampai kepada tahapan menggabungkan itu atau memberdayakan dari klinik-klinik kecil yang ada di luar Jawa menjadi dalam satu kesatuan di dalam satu buah komunitas yang besar. Mereka masih berada di dalam healthcare community masing-masing. Pertanyaannya adalah bagaimana ya Bu caranya agar kita atas challenge tadi dengan penyebaran yang tidak merata tersebut dan dominan di Jawa, bagaimana caranya membangun mindset daripada para kompetitor dengan para klinik-klinik yang memang sudah skalanya besar ini mau merangkul atau membangun support system dengan merangkul klinik-klinik kecil yang ada di luar Jawa. Karena sebenarnya kebutuhan orang-orang pusat yang di Jakarta, di Jawa, itu sebenarnya kalau perusahaannya punya banyak kebutuhan hingga keluar Jawa, mereka butuh tangan-tangan di luar Jawa tersebut gitu. Nah, pertanyaannya itu bagaimana ya untuk membangun itu? Karena pemerintah sendiri di Indonesia saat ini baru hanya membentuk komunitas dalam rangkuman untuk layanan kesehatan penanganan saja. Iya. Oke. Kita masih berpikir mereka sebagai kompetitor ya. Jadi tidak mau kalau nggak punya kepentingan malah jadi buat mereka jadi beban, mereka nggak mau untuk merangkul yang kecil ini.
Okay. Can I just ask a few questions on that? So these clinics are they all private clinics?
Saya memperjelas. Yang saya maksudkan adalah penelitian untuk klinik private atau swasta. Karena di Indonesia ini hasil penelitian saya itu is private clinic. Only 1% is government clinic.
All right. Thank you very much. Terima kasih for that. So the question is, you have a lot of private clinics within Java Island. However, there are not that many outside Java, and to you, there is a need for to have more clinics outside Java Island. So, what you also say is that currently there's no policy by the government to address the needs of people outside Java, right? Now, See, and I always tell people this. I have no idea how Indonesia governs themselves. So, no, not because you're doing a bad job of governing, but geographically, you have one of the most difficult uh, ways to govern because of the way you are set up geographically. Yeah. So it is. I have great respect for those in governments and in public sector when they try to do this because it is very difficult. So that's first thing I would say. Now, second thing I would say is why isn't the government involved in this? Yeah? Why are they not involved in ensuring that there are sufficient clinics outside Java? Not enough doctors. Yeah. Let's ask the first one first. Yeah. Why are they not interested in trying to make sure that the people outside Java have access to health services? Now, I'm assuming you still have hospitals, right? Public hospitals. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ramona, Professor Ramona. Thank you. My answer are first, less profitability for Indonesia. Then, then the second one, hospital services better Malaysian or Singapore more than Indonesia. That's why for health services, most of the population in Indonesia will choose to go to Malaysia or Singapore or Taiwan or something or Korea, even they choose to do their health in Indonesia. That's why. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now I have another question then. As much as I want to encourage all of you to come to Malaysia for the medical tourism, it's good for my country. So my question is, what about people who cannot afford to go anywhere else? Why do you only have private clinic? You have public clinics as well. Okay. So, but you have no issue with the public clinics. You only have issue with the private clinics. Is that what you say? Okay. So you're only talking about the private sector rather than the public sector. Is that it? So from the public sector, the health services are sufficient. Are we saying that? We're saying that from public sector, health services are sufficient. The ecosystem of private. That's what I need to understand. If how important is it, this ecosystem of private clinics? Mainly because my main interest would be to ensure from a public sector perspective that everybody have access to health. And if it is not provided by the public sector, then it's a huge problem. Now, if the private sector is not working, because that's what you're saying, the smaller clinics, they don't have the ecosystem, so they are not sustainable, right? So business-wise, they are not sustainable.
I have a trigger for this reason when COVID,
Mm.
the private clinic private clinic is they have a goal for the profit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have a goal,
Private clinic would go for
Yeah.
profit. They're private.
of course. They have apa namanya corporate corporate B2B business B2B
Yeah.
they have partner for
Yeah.
partner corporate partner. They will be have services for ya. Kalau mereka punya kerjasama B2B
Yeah, yeah.
dengan korporasi tersebut,
Yeah.
maka mereka memiliki keberlanjutan itu. Artinya ada yang dilayani pada saat COVID kemarin.
Yeah.
Karena kalau mengharapkan yang publik, umum, masyarakat umum, dalam hal ini, waktu saat COVID itu jumlahnya sangat sedikit. Dan yang cukup tinggi, yang menarik adalah pada saat COVID kemarin adalah pelanggan dari corporate.
Yeah.
Maka mereka tetap bisa berlangsung. Itu triggernya dari latar belakang dari asal penelitian ini.
Yeah.
Cuma masalahnya, contoh beberapa perusahaan besar di yang headquarternya ada di Jakarta, ketika mereka seperti anggaplah BINUS ya, BINUS ini cukup tersebar gitu. Nah, kita kan butuh satu channel untuk melayani karyawannya kita yang tersebar ini. Maka kita butuh perusahaan-perusahaan klinik yang memiliki banyak partner ataupun mereka punya anak cabang di seluruh Indonesia gitu.
Yeah.
Nah, saya membayangkannya kalau perusahaan itu adalah perusahaan besar seperti Prodia yang contohnya sudah berbentuk TBK, aman. Tetapi kalau perusahaan itu adalah perusahaan-perusahaan kecil yang memang tidak punya channel gitu, mereka pada mati tuh di luar Indonesia. Saya hanya kekhawatiran saya adalah bagaimana mendorong klinik-klinik kecil yang di luar Indonesia, di luar Jakarta ini bisa terkoneksi dengan yang di Jakarta. Karena ternyata memang hanya beberapa klinik yang mempunyai inisiatif itu. Contohnya ada salah satu klinik yang mau berpartner dengan klinik manapun yang ada di luar kota gitu, di luar Jawa gitu. Tetapi itu pun kalau mereka mampu memiliki fasilitas atau tadi scale up tadi. Kliniknya harus mampu bisa melayani dengan kebutuhan yang sesuai diminta gitu, standar dengan di Jawa gitu.
Ya.
Jadi dalam hal ini challenging-nya bagi klinik-klinik itu sendiri adalah yang di luar Jawa adalah mereka ukurannya mereka ya, maksudnya keterbatasan fasilitasnya mereka ya. Tadi itu sumber daya, dokter, kayak gitu-gitu.
Yeah, so I understand. I understand. So this is because I was trying to make it clear in my mind whether this is something that public sector should get involved in, because obviously this is private sector clinics. Yeah. Now there is I do worry sometimes if government get too much involved in the private sector, because that might encourage unintended consequences, because there's too much government involvement in that, because private sector is run differently than public sector. So my concern would be, if there is no private clinic, would that affect the well-being of the people there? Now, if it affects the well-being of the people there because there's no private clinic, then yes, the government need to get involved in doing something, not in the private clinic, but on how they can access health services. Now, Abiki has mentioned a few things in reverse innovation. There are a lot of innovations now whereby you don't have to go to the clinic in order to get diagnosis. You can video call, you send them picture, you talk to them, they see you, they can tell what's wrong with you. They can send you the medication. If you are still not okay within whatever day, I mean, they're physicians, right? I'm a doctor, but not the right kind of doctor to advise that. Then they say, okay, now you have to go to a hospital. So there are ways to address people remotely. Because the good thing about Indonesia is, wherever you go, you get signal. Right? Mobile signal. That's a good thing about Indonesia. If you go to Scotland, where you go somewhere, you don't have signal. That's why they're developing country as well. Yeah. So there would be that. Now, should the government get involved? I'm not sure yet. Because I can't give you an answer because I don't know the full situation on that. But I am hesitant to say government should get involved in private sector. Yeah. So that would be because looking at historical evidence, if there's too much involvement, it's not good.
Kan mensupport klinik-klinik swasta untuk layanan publik klinik swasta ini di luar Jawa ini dengan cara, kalau saya ngebayangin ke depannya, apakah mungkin menurut Ibu mereka perlu tadi yang dibilang tadi layanan telemedicine mungkin ya, karena online ya, kalau untuk bisa melayani itu. Artinya support pemerintah adalah membangun sistem layanan online lah kepada klinik-klinik yang jauh itu untuk bisa terkoneksi dengan.
Tapi kenapa pemerintah yang mesti buat that? Why must it be pemerintah?
Nah, telemedicine kayak gitu. Atau yang saya merasa masalah yang saya suka.
But doing a video call now, you do WhatsApp, right? You do Telegram. You can do that. You don't have to have additional things. Yes, there are sophisticated systems where you press something and you get. But if you're a small business, do not think this is what reverse innovation is important. Don't think you have to use what is currently being used in developed countries. Yes, this is available in developed countries where I have an app. If I don't feel well, I press saying I want a video call with the doctor, and that doctor, and that doctor doesn't necessarily will be in the UK. The doctor can be anywhere around the world. They link it. Could be an Indonesian doctor because I'm up Indonesian time because they have the links. Yeah. But you don't have to think that big. Think with your affordability. That's what reverse innovation is about. Think of something that you can do within that. I'm not, again, I don't know well enough to say whether or not pemerintah needs to get involved in this and develop infrastructure. But I don't think you need further infrastructure in order to do this right now for the smaller clinics. If you can show that you are able to do that, what you need though is a doctor or a nurse to always be available on WhatsApp or on Telegram or on Viber. That's what you need. Sorry.
Just one thing. In my opinion, if you're talking about how the government involved in the situation, this may be related to the regulation. Is it the regulation, what you call is, make it hard, make it difficult to people or someone to build their clinic? If the case, if it is so, maybe it's an issue. But in the reality, government is make very, very open, what we call support, give a good regulation, blah, blah. So it's come to the private sector, not to the public sector.
So there are ways they can improve. So the business model, they need to look at their business model. They can try and reverse innovate. That will be the best way of doing it. Don't think you need to do the same thing as what's happening in Jakarta, because Jakarta is different. Yeah? So think of it that way. Sorry.
Okay, we are running out of time. Yeah, I know the audience, not only in this room, but also from the Zoom, wants to raise question, but we have limited time. We are very sorry about that. Yeah, thank you for the presentation, Dr. Ramona Blaines, yeah, and also Pak Bakit, yeah, we call you Pak Bakit, and also Abla, yeah. Thank you very much. We give you a big applause to the speakers. Yeah, before we close the session, yeah, I want to sum up with some key points, yeah, from Dr. Ramona and also from and also there are 4 topics here talking about the public sector reform. Delivered by Dr. Ramona and also followed by the sustainability, I think, sustainability by Bakit and also unintended consequences. Yeah. And then the last session from Pak Brai talking about very interesting point, very interesting topics about the reverse innovation related to the public sectors. In the public sector reform, Dr. Ramona differentiate between PA, public administration, public management, and also public management, and the latest development about the new public service. Yeah, and then also she mentioned about the theoretical background among the 4 initiatives. Yeah, and also talking about the concept, very important concept and very trending topics now about the sustainable management, sustainability that should be initiated not only by the specific country, but also this is becomes the global initiative, I think, yeah. And when implementing the sustainability, we have to pay attention or bear in mind about the concept of UC, unintended consequences. Very important, yeah. What is unintended consequences is about the outcomes of proposed fuel action that are not intended or forced. So be careful on this unintended consequences. So that's why in the session description, not just focus on the output, but focus more on the outcome, because output is only short-term orientation. Yeah, focus more on the outcomes. And also about the reverse innovation. Here, I mentioned about the benefits and also the challenges. Yeah, you mentioned about the benefits, some benefits, including cost reduction, social impacts, and also the challenges, yeah, especially for our country, how to scale up, and also about the cultural difference, the market adaptation, and also the perception of quality. I think it's that very important, also valid to our country. And the last session, yeah, closed by Dr. Ramona, talking about how to implement, how to integrate together between the public administration, public management, new public service, and also finally goes to the examples how to implement and the consequences. Yeah. So I think the conclusion here, yeah, first of all, especially you are in the public sector as a public sector manager, you have to focus more on the public value, interest value or public value. You have to focus on that. Second, you have to pay attention to, this is related to the outcomes, unintended consequences. Unintended consequences, especially the negative one. And the third, I think we have to bear in mind the objective, not just focus on the output because that's only short-term impact, but focus more on the outcomes because this is very valid and also relevant in the future, yeah, for the next generation, talking about long-term consequences. And the last one, I think, as a government official or government institution, yeah, relate to the question of Ibu Sari, I think government should not involve too much in the private sector. Yeah? Don't involve too much to the private sector. Just facilitate. don't involve directly or become the operator, yeah, as well, in order to avoid the unintended consequences. So again, thank you, Dr. Ramona, Pak Abi, and also Pak Ablaya, give this applause. Very much appreciate to all of you to share here, all of you, to three of you. Again, if you have question, maybe later you can directly contact Dr. Ramona and team. Yeah, thank you. I handed the session to the Pak Alex, yeah, Mas Alex. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. It is a great seminar, yeah. So discussion we have today, yeah, with Dr. Ramona, and thank you for Professor Dr. Insinyur Muhammad Hamzah for great leading, yeah, for the discussion. And I think we need more time, yeah. We lost track of time. I think after this, yeah, you can connect with Dr. Ramona after this. Maybe if she still have time, yeah, to answer some of your question. Maybe there are a lot of curiosity, yeah, again, that is not answered yet. Okay, so thank you again to our speaker, Dr. Ramona. It's very inspiring, yeah. So a lot of things that we have to talk about the public reform for sustainability, yeah, and also for Mr. Both of you, thank you for giving us also insights, yeah, deeper insights on sustainability. And now, before we close the session, I would like to invite Dr. Sri Ramantoro Abdinegoro, CSP, CMP, Deputy Head of Doctor of Research in Management, to give token of appreciation to Dr. Ramona Blaise. Please, Dr. Ramona. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we please a moment, yeah, Dr. Ramona and Dr. Brown, yeah. Please a moment. Fajar bisa ngitung nanti. Oh, ya. Ya, Fajar ambil uang. Ya. Oke, Besma. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, maybe we can end the session now. Thank you for joining us today for this session. We will have a group photo first, and for the participant in Zoom, also you can fill up the exit ticket. We will have a group photo first. Ya, dan maybe di tengah aja. Yang di belakang bisa majuan ya, please up. Di tengah,
Yeah, so we will take the picture from here so everybody. Boleh dipenuhi di depan saja. Ibu,
Teman-teman yang di belakang ya. Bapak Ibu yang di belakang, teman-teman di belakang. Fajar duluan yang di mungkin di sini sebelah sini di kanan.
Ada.
Mati ya. Bukan ini ini. No, pelan. Yeah, okay. Okay. This camera. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Again. 3, 2, 1. Give another. What's everybody? This camera. Wait. 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Yeah. One more.
One more. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Beautiful. Thank you very much, everybody. So once again, thank you very much for all the attendees. See you again on the next seminars, international seminars. Okay, you can leave the room, or if you want to connect with Pramana, you can also approach her. Yeah.
Fotoin. Thank you, Pak. Aku ada meeting lagi, soalnya nanti dibantu ngajar aja. Ya, makasih ya Pak ya. Panjang gimana ya? Pak.
Yes.
Ya, buat teman-teman sekali lagi diinformasikan untuk mengisi exit ticket ya. Dan juga bagi yang belum mengisi entry ticket, boleh tolong informasikan ke kami juga ya. Karena untuk sertifikat itu hanya diberikan bagi peserta yang mengisi entry dan juga exit ticket. Untuk prosesnya sendiri untuk sertifikat itu akan dikirimkan dalam waktu 2 minggu. Terima kasih.
Who is that woman? Okay, talk about